broadcasting right now and taping. So, hello everyone. My name is Thiago. Uh, we are here with Professor Edith Hall, that I believe most of you already know. She's a great promoter of classics, and it's a great honor to have her here with us today, direct from Rio. Uh, we'll be broadcasting this in the name of the Arete Society of Classic Studies, and here we are with our reading club. Yesterday we read The Frogs, and now we'll have the great honor of having this presentation on Aristophanes. Edith, if you want to present yourself or start, it's a great pleasure to have you here.
Lovely to be with you all on a very rainy, horrible day in England. Lots of mud. I just walked the dog. So Thiago asked me to talk about Aristophanes, and I'm very happy to do this. He's one of my very, very favourite of all ancient Greek authors. In fact, if I had to have choice of just one person to go to a dinner party with, it would certainly be Aristophanes, because of the combination of intellect and wit. He's got both. I also think he's very, very democratic. I think he really believes in the Athenian democracy and the role of comedy in maintaining a healthy civilization. I think he really thinks he's doing a very important social and political job, as well as amusing people. So Aristophanes' works, we've got 11 plays by him. He wrote quite a lot more, and there were many other, several other important poets of old comedy that he competed against. But unfortunately, we haven't got a full play by any of the others. It's only Aristophanes, and we haven't got all of his, but we have got these precious, precious 11 plays, which I think have actually influenced comedy and comic theory and literature more widely in terms of the whole imaginative dimension all over the world. I've found recently, for example, even in China, Aristophanes being used in semi-legal blogs protesting against the government. I found him in Russian satire. I found it all over the place. Please. So sorry, my husband's going to make me a cup of tea. So, first of all, I just want to show you some pictures of what comedy looked like in Aristophanes' day. We have many vase paintings. The ancient Greeks, especially the Athenians, this is Athens, Athenian culture, were crazy about theatre. They absolutely loved it. It was still quite a recent invention, theatre. It was only about 100 years old. So it's a bit like cinema for us. This is still a relatively new medium for them. And they absolutely loved it. And in comedy, they had a very particular style of costumes, which were funny in themselves. So in the top left-hand picture here, you've got a extraordinary play where you've got three comic characters here with the typical stuffed stomach and extra padded bottom, so they look sort of fat and lumpy. They always have these or usually have these artificial phalluses attached, and they have these masks that are deliberately quite distorted and ugly and comical. I'm sure you've got similar mask traditions in the carnival cultures of South America. That's an old man with white hair, two younger ones. Well, what's great about this, it's not a play we've got. We don't know what the play was. It's a comedy. You can see the wooden stage on pillars standing up there with a little ladder for the actors to go up and a door into the house. Well, what's really great is you've got a character from a tragedy there, right? He's actually called Aegisthus, who's somebody in Greek tragedy coming in very different. You can see the different tragic costume, which is elegant and a beautiful dress and a beautiful face. So you've got like two, you've got a tragic character coming in to a comedy, which if you think about the Frogs, where you've got Aeschylus and Euripides as tragic actors in a comedy, you can see that comedy like to have characters in to do with other literary genres. This play I really wish we'd got, because it's a comedy about the birth of Helen of Troy, because she was born from an egg. Her mother Leda laid eggs after she'd had sex with Zeus as a swan. And in this play, this egg is being cracked open by two comic characters in the same costume with the phalluses and the padding. But we've got little baby Helen coming out. And this is one of my favourites. This is in the British Museum. And the reason I like it so much is it's an old slave in slave costume with a statue of Heracles, and it actually has written, you can't read it, but it does. It actually says Xanthias. And that actually might be Xanthias the slave in Frogs. Oh, Ricky, you're right. Sorry, my husband just fell over. You okay?
Yeah.
Oh no. Because he's looking at the statue of Heracles in the opening scene of the Frogs, he goes to Heracles. So that's the kind of look. And here's the chronology. So there was no theatre before, there was no comic theatre until after the Athenian Democratic Revolution. It's very, very much to do with the democracy. It's to do with freedom of speech and freedom of satire, to attack people and criticise politicians. Very much a popular democratic genre. So in 507, before the Christian era, Athens had its democratic revolution. And then 21 years later, the Athenian festivals of Dionysus officially had their first ever actual comedy competition. So it's very, very much related to the democratic culture. Then we sadly have no comedies, though, for another 61 years. We don't have any of the comedies from the middle. Thank you. Husband brought tea. Thank you so much, Ricardo. So Aristophanes' first comedy we got is at 425 BCE. His last one is 388. So all the comedies we've got are from within 40 years. And then in fact the democracy ended officially 60 years later, after the conquests of Alexander the Great and the other Macedonians. And the comedy became very, very different. It became comedy of manners, set in the family. It wasn't political, it wasn't obscene in the same way. This is a one-off period under the very radical democracy, and it's very much geared towards testing the reputation of politicians and powerful people in the democratic city. And it's paid for by the city. The city actually pays for the drama competitions. It pays for the chorus, or gets a rich person to pay for the chorus. It's part of democratic politics. And the basic features shared by all the plays are these. And in fact, I've got a book out quite recently, a volume of essays on Aristophanic humour, which if anybody emails me, I can actually send you the PDF. I know you students don't have any money, but I can send you the PDF of that book if anybody asks.
Oh,
so I'm happy for you to share it amongst each other if one of you asks me for it. Okay, it's ridiculously expensive, but the basic plot of all the comedies is always the same. There's a problem. There's a problem, usually affecting the whole city-state. Sometimes it's a private problem, but the problem is how to stop the war, how to stop corrupt demagogues, the people who are trying to lead the people but who are corrupt and trying to get money off the city and deceive the citizens, how to foil of sophists, us in the clouds, how to watch out for very clever, sophistical people who are trying to make money out of you, teaching you rhetoric and science. How to Solve Poverty. The last two plays are both about how to solve poverty. And in The Frogs, of course, it's just before the end of the Peloponnesian War, and it's how on earth not to lose the war. Athens is in terrible trouble, and Sparta is winning all the sea battles now and looking as though it's going to win the war. So the great question is, how on earth do we still manage to win the war and carry on having our democracy and having our theatre? So the questions are, should we get one of the old poets back from the underworld, Aeschylus or Euripides? If so, which one? Which one is going to save us? And should we bring back this very renegade, difficult politician, Alcibiades? Because although he is deeply untrustworthy, he is a very brilliant general. Then you've always got a hero who's on this quest to solve this problem. Hero or a heroine. In two of the plays, Lysistrata and Women at the Assembly, it's actually a female, and it's usually an ordinary, free, but ordinary working class Athenian citizen. So this is very much designed to please the majority in the audience, who are working class, free, but poor Athenians. The hero is sort of one of them. So in The Frogs, it's most unusual because it's actually the god Dionysus, right? That is wholly exceptional. All the other plays, it's actually a mortal, a human being, and an Athenian citizen. Dionysus behaves a bit like an ordinary person, but he is actually a god. But that is most unusual. Then you have what Aristophanes is so famous for, his imagination. The supernatural is completely permissible in comedy. You can go up to the gods, you can go and live with the birds, you can go down to Hades, you can go on extraordinary adventures, and you can time travel. You can be 1 minute, even if you're an ordinary mortal, in Athens, and the next minute you can be up in Olympus with the gods. So it allows a very strong supernatural and imaginative element and absurd element. The very idea that, for example, that women could take over the city like in Lysistrata is fundamentally absurd. It has these routine attacks on powerful people, even in plays like The Birds, where we're not really dealing with Athenian society. You still got choruses where particular individuals are attacked and criticised. And other plays, especially the early ones like The Knights and the Wasps, very particular individual powerful people get attacked, like Cleon. And you have many, many, many different kinds of humour. You have satire, you have parody. In The Frogs, you've got long parodies of actual tragedies. You've got a great deal of obscenity, both sexual and scatological, to do with toilets and the body and eating and farting. And you also have a big stunt. And Aristophanes likes to put his big stunt, unlike tragedy where you tend to build up to a climax near the end, Aristophanes likes to get the big stunt in near the beginning, because comedy works completely differently. All stand-up comics know that if you get the audience laughing near the beginning, you can keep on making the same jokes with running gags, right? So you have a big stunt. So in The Frogs, it's the frog chorus. It's when Dionysus is trying to row over the river Styx and the Acheron down to Hades, and you have the chorus of frogs going Rekakekex, Coax, Coax, and Dionysus not managing to row. So that's a sort of showstopper to get the audience's attention. And almost all of the plays have got something very soon after the sort of prologue scene, which is a really spectacular, hilarious. It might be a chorus. It might be in the piece, Tragaius gets on the beetle, the big dung beetle, and flies up to see the gods. You almost always have a big stunt near the beginning. So now I'm just going to take you the brief description through each of the 11 plays with their date, and then the last 10 minutes I'll go back and focus on frogs a bit more. So the first play we've got by Aristophanes, not the first he wrote, but the first we've got, is called Acarnanians. Now the Acarnanians, Acharnae is a district of Athens renowned for its very warlike soldier citizens, and it also had a cult of the war god Ares. So the chorus is a very, very, very warlike Athenians, but the hero Diciopolis is just a poor peasant farmer, not from Acharnae, from a remote hillside farm, and he is fed up at the continuing war with Sparta, because at that time all the Athenian citizens were having to go into behind the walls in the city of Attica every year while the Spartans were raiding their territory, and the farmers were having a terrible time because the Spartans used to come and cut down all their vines. So he says, I've had enough of this, I don't care anymore, and he concludes a private peace treaty, completely absurd that an ordinary citizen could do that, with the assistance of a minor god called Amphitheos. And then in the second half of the play, he has a lot of opponents come to try to stop him. You have this routine scenes where lots of different people come and try to create problems. He gets the general Lamachus, who comes on and says, no, we've got to go to war, but he makes short shrift of him, and then he celebrates with dancing girls. So here are some pictures. You've got a very old photograph of a play, a production in Cambridge of Tregarris there with his dancing girls at the end. Got a drawing of all the different characters that come on the play from a school production, and also very interestingly, Euripides lying on his couch, because Diciopolis needs different costumes. So he actually goes to see Euripides, who's the playwright who appears in 3 of Aristophanes' surviving plays, this one and Frogs and The Women at the Thesmophoria. And there's a very funny scene with reciting Euripides' plays again. There's also a brilliant series of Greek comic strip cartoons for the plays, which you can find translated into English as well, with these amazing comic strips. They're great fun. I do recommend them. You can find them online. Then the year after, in 424, one of, I think, his most political plays, and in some ways my total favourite, the Hippaeus, the Knights. This is very much about class warfare, because the chorus is a very upper class knights. They can afford to ride horses, and they had some kind of artificial horse that they galloped around on the stage on. But the major character is here it's his house. He's actually Demos. He's a personification of the democratic people. So he is an old man now, and 2 politicians are like competing for his attention. The whole play is about a competition. One of them is the real Cleon, who was a demagogue who was very successful and running the country at the time. But Aristophanes suspected him of being very corrupt. So it's a big attack on him. And he was a very great speaker, a very great orator. And you had to be very powerful to be an orator in the Athenian democracy, because you had to speak out of doors to tens of thousands of citizens and get them on your side. So what the knights do, who are fed up with Cleon, is that they go and get a sausage seller from the market. There he is with his sausages. And the lowest class, he's free citizen, but the very, very lowest class. And they train him up, teach him how to be a speaker, to attack and beat Cleon. He actually wins. It's very, very, very funny. And we end up with the sausage seller as the Demos' favourite citizen. So this is very much about how top politicians speak to the public. it would be a very good play actually to, I don't know, have something like you could do now, Trump as Cleon with Biden or something coming up as a sausage seller, and do some presidential debates in front of the demos. I'm sure that you've got politicians that you could imagine. But what's your politician? Bolsonaro. I don't know. Is there a very good opponent of his that you could have a debate play with? Clowns is very, very, very famous because it has Socrates in it. But it's a very strange play, and it wasn't very successful. I think it was too intellectual. Also, the hero, Strepsiades, is only got a private problem instead of a state problem. It's a private problem. He has run out of money, and he wants to learn tricks for tricking people in business and clever rhetoric for tricking the people that he owes money to. And so he decides to go off to a philosopher, and he goes to Socrates' thinkery, the Frontisterion. And it's an incredibly funny parody of philosophy. There is Socrates swinging around in his basket doing science, saying he's studying the air and how the universe works, doing physics. The choruses of cloud ladies, and you've also got these men in the actual thinkery, students of Socrates, who are always bending down looking at the earth. And Strepsiades and his son both go and train at the thinkery. It's an attack actually on the sorts of philosophers who taught you how to sort of tell lies and how to do rhetoric. It's incredibly funny if you know anything about ancient Greek philosophy, but it didn't win. The other two that we both seen won. It didn't win. It wasn't at all popular because I think the general audience didn't know enough about philosophy to get the jokes, and they wanted a proper political play. They thought this was too intellectual. So the next year in Wasps, he goes back to politics. And he goes back to Cleon because that had worked in the Knights. And it's not dissimilar. It's an attack on Cleon again. Cleon worked his influence, a lot of his influence, by getting the old men who sat on the democratic juries of Athens. He used to use them to vote against his political enemies. He used the law courts. So Aristophanes has this brilliant idea of having chorus of old, poor, working class men who earn their living by being jurors in the law courts, having them as wasps, because the idea that the jurors sting the people that they attack. So the problem here is, how do we convert the old man Philocleon, who's mad about jury service? How do we persuade him to stop wanting all the time to go and serve on the juries and be harsh to Cleon's enemies? And the highlight, the absolute highlight, is the trial of the two dogs. One of them is Cleon, who's Aristophanes makes a household dog, and he competes in a trial. You can see this is actually production at my own college, King's College London. He competes in a trial with another dog about who's stolen some cheese, but basically it's a battle between politicians again. It's extremely funny and was very successful. I think that one came second. Peace in 41 is a beautiful play. The problem there is that the Athenians, by this stage in the war, it's 10 years into the Peloponnesian War, really want to make peace with Sparta. And they do. And actually, this was put on at the festival when the Spartans were there to make a treaty. So it's very celebratory. Irene is the Greek for peace. There's her statue. The hero is an ordinary Athenian farmer again called Tragaius. He's got incredible superpowers. Here he rides on his beetle up to heaven as if he was some kind of god to torture the gods. But the gods with Hermes say what you have to do is drag out the statue of peace because she's been stuck underneath the earth. You've got to bring peace back. So with all the farmers of Greece, Trigaius pulls her out in a big tug of war, and there's lots of celebrations. In birds, I mean, I love birds. The chorus is of 24 men in different bird costumes. Every different. It must have been unbelievably expensive and unbelievably beautiful. And the choruses of this are very beautiful. They're imitating bird song. But this one is rather different because it's, again, a private problem. The hero is called Pisistratus, and he's just fed up with Athens. Everything about Athens. He's fed up with all the law courts. He's fed up with all the democratic politics. He's fed up with all the military expeditions. He wants a quiet life, but he also wants to be a sort of very powerful person. He doesn't like democracy. So he goes off to Thrace, which is now Bulgaria, with his mate Euripides, and says to the bird king there, okay, why don't I be your king? I'm cleverer than you are. And together we're going to take over the universe from the god praised. And in the end, with the birds, they actually beat the Olympian gods. There he is, Pisistratus. And he calls himself the new Zeus of the bird kingdom. He gets the thunderbolt of Zeus. And the play ends with the solution to his problem. As an Athenian fed up with democracy, you go off and you set up a tyranny in Thrace. I mean, it's quite an odd play. But I think there were Thrace was where Athenians who didn't like the democracy used to go off to make their fortune. It was a sort of backwater, and they used to go and run slave markets and mines and trading posts. So it's a play about how discontented Athenians used to go off to make their fortune in Thrace. Then we have two of the three women plays, the wonderful Lysistrata. Again, this is war is the problem. The war has been going on now for 20 years. In 413 BCE, the Athenians suffered a terrible defeat when they tried to conquer Sicily. They lost thousands and thousands of men and really had not got enough men anymore even to man the ships and the army. So Aristophanes imagines a woman, a wife of Athens, leading the women of Athens in a campaign for peace. It's incredibly funny. Recently, Spike Lee made a film of it set in Chicago, where the women of Chicago go on sex strike, like Lysistrata. Well, the older women don't go on sex strike. The older women take over the treasury on the Acropolis. The younger women go on sex strike. And in the end, they solve the problem and they get the Spartans and the Athenian men to make peace. There isn't much supernatural here. In the women plays, the women don't get superpowers. They tend to work much more as actual humans. But it's a classic and very popular play for obvious reasons, and much performed in times of war. Also in 411, we have two plays from 411. Women celebrating the Thesmophoria. That means women celebrating the festivals of Demeter. Now, in 411, there was a very tense political atmosphere, and this is deeply unpolitical. Euripides is actually with his cousin. They're the stars, and the problem is a private one. Would you believe Euripides is fed up because the women of Athens are angry with him because they're saying, look, he keeps making plays about women like Medea. He's portraying us as bad people. So they have a plot to try and kill Euripides, or at least take him to court. The women of Athens are the chorus. He sends in his old cousin, or relative by marriage, who at some point pretends to be a tragic figure. We've actually got a pot there showing a scene from this play. You can see how a chorus female looked in that play. But it's just about Euripides and his cousin escaping from the women. But again, this means lots and lots of parody of Euripidean tragedy. And the frogs, which you've just read. You've got Dionysus, the god, and a human, Xanthias, actually the slave. There he is in a recent Greek production, riding on a donkey at the beginning. Now, this is 405. The problem is, how on earth do we stop ourselves losing the war? The slave is incredibly interesting. It's the biggest and most important slave role ever in Greek comedy. First time that a slave has been such an important part. And actually many Athenian slaves had just been freed because with all the free men killed, they actually manned the ships. And they were told if they rowed for Athens in the war, they could be free. So I think Xanthias, the invention of Xanthias, is partly a response to that. And that's why it's so funny that Dionysus can't row properly, because all these slaves, new slaves, freed slaves in the audience can. And there they encounter this audience of Greek-speaking frogs. That's a recent production at Cambridge. The frogs dancing, going vrekakakeks, coax, coax. They get down to Hades to bring back Euripides, but in fact end up deciding to bring back the much more old-fashioned and patriotic Aeschylus. Athens lost the war, for a couple of years lost the democracy. The democracy was, however, re-established, but Athens had lost her empire, and she was never rich again in the same way because she'd lost the empire. So both the plays from the next century, Assembly Women and Wealth, the problem is lack of money. The Assembly Women has got a chorus of women who decide that they would run the country much better than the men. They disguise themselves as men, they put on long beards, and they go secretly into the assembly and have a female feminist revolution and solve the problem of poverty by this feminist revolution. And Praxagora is the ordinary Athenian citizen woman. And finally, in Wealth, again, poverty is the problem, but the solution is different. We have the protagonist, who's a poor Athenian citizen called Kremilos, and he manages to get Wealth, the god of wealth, who's a blind old man. He manages to get Wealth to come and live with him in Athens and with all the Athenians, and they bring in a utopia. That's an Epidaurus production from 2013. Very heartfelt because the Greeks were suffering financially so much at the time. So that's an overview of the 11 different plays. They're all very funny, they're all worth reading, but perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit more about the frogs. What really interests me about this is that at a time when there is this great crisis, I mean, Athenians have now been at war since 431 BCE. They've been at war for 26 years. They've got huge problems with manpower, huge problems with lack of men and bereavement, women complaining because there was no one to marry, the very clear prospect of their democracy being taken away from them by the Spartans, which in fact it was, after they lost the war just the following year. They were facing a year of siege and being starved out. Terrible, dark hour. But at this point, it is really fascinating to me that what Aristophanes decides is that theatre can save Athens. Tragic theatre. If we get the right tragedian, we can get back to the proper spirit. And this is very interesting to me because I think the Athenians, most other city-states didn't have theatre, except the only other place that had started doing theatre very much was Macedon, very, very recently. And they invited Euripides to go there, and he died up there. But basically, Athens was theatre city. Sparta didn't do theatre. Thebes didn't do theatre. Corinth didn't do theatre. So their identity as a democracy was very, very bound up with the festivals of Dionysus and with tragedy and comedy. So it's very, very interesting to me that although the end question is, should we bring back Alcibiades, and should we try to reconcile with some of our other aristocratic leaders who we've sent into exile? Should we be trying to get all the best brains back into the country, regardless of if we're a bit suspicious of their politics? And Alcibiades had spied for Sparta. I mean, he had. The real question is, which playwright should we have? So the first half is this marvellous catabasis, it's called, going down story, going down to Hades. We have the wonderful relationship between Dionysus and Xanthias, where Xanthias is much, much, much cleverer, much, much stronger. He's the one who can withstand the flogging. And interestingly, as a slave, he's not been freed. He said he didn't row in the sea battle, so he hasn't been freed. He's still a slave. He decides to stay down there. He follows a dead young woman who runs a pub through the gates into Hades. He thinks it's a lot better off to be in Hades in a nice pub with a nice woman than up as a slave in Athens. Very powerful scene, that. But then the second half is this very famous competition between Aeschylus and Euripides, with lots of parodies from their plays, which shows that not just Aristophanes but his audience must have been quite familiar with them. I think the best way to modernise this, some people do things like Shakespeare versus a 20th century playwright like, I don't know, Cocteau or Beckett, something like that. I think it would be very good to do a film version where you could have something like one of the great old film directors from the golden age of cinema, the 1950s, up against someone like Tarantino doing Euripides. So which form of art is more useful? Which form of cinema is more important? I mean, I've never seen that, but that's what I would actually like to see, a production, because we as audience, if they use films that we were all familiar with, would get the jokes about the style of two different film directors, if they were very famous ones, in a way that maybe we wouldn't now. And also it's a live medium, and we could discuss whether Zack Snyder with 300 was better or worse for politics than somebody from much earlier. So that's really worth discussing. I think Aristophanes can help us think about the role of comedy today. Also, the final thing I would just say is that the sheer shock factor of a lot of Aristophanes, not just in terms of the obscenity, but in terms of the way the gods are criticised and laughed at, politicians are criticised and laughed at. This is very, very healthy satire for democracy. It's a very, very good example when satire is under pressure, as it has been, especially in France, with actual attacks on satirical magazines and killing of cartoonists. It's this Athenian example of accountability by comedy, that if you want any power of any kind, whether it's literary, philosophical, ideological, or political, or military, then you're jolly well going to have to take having jokes made about you in the theatre. And I think that this is why I love Aristophanes so much. He's not just incredibly funny, but he's incredibly healthy politically. So that's the end of my speech.
Oh, that was great. Thank you so much, Edith. I have personally for myself some questions, and everyone here, if you want, they can or type or make the questions themselves. Now, if they type, I will read it. For me, the character of Shantias struck me a lot in the Frogs, especially because it reminds me of Roman comedies. There's always this character of the slave, and in all texts about Roman comedies, they compare them to Menander, especially. But to see this slave character so smart and taking so much preeminence there, do you believe there's a stronger relation between like comedies in the Roman period or Menander and Aristophanes than many people normally do? Connection.
It's a very good question. I mean, the clever slave, right,
Yeah.
who can outwit the master, does become really dominant at Rome, in Plautus especially. And this, I think, is a response to the fact that these plays of Plautus are put on in the context of festivals like the Saturnalia, which were festivals when slaves and masters inverted roles anyway. That's part of the whole ethos of especially Plautus comedies. There are very clever slaves in Menander, but Menander comedy is much more refined. Plautus goes back to much more slapstick knockabout, a bit more like Aristophanes. The thing about Xanthias, though, and that's what I was trying to say, is I think that he's new. There's nothing like him in the earlier Aristophanic plays. And I think it is a direct response to the fact that the Athenians had to liberate a large number of male slaves in that few years. And I love that. And I like to think they're actually these newly freed slaves are sitting in the theatre. So Aristophanes needs them to clap if he's going to win.
Yeah.
So he creates a character for them, right? Who's outwitted even the god of theatre himself. Now he does. I'm sad he disappears halfway through the play. I'd like to see him going back to Earth. But in fact, this decision to make him say, "Well, stuff you. I'm just going to stay in Hades. I've got my woman. I've got my pub." Right? He's kind of got his freedom in his own way down there. And of course, we need one more actor back because we've only got 3 actors. We've got to have somebody back. 3 main actors. We've got to have somebody back to play Aeschylus or Euripides. And I like to think that back Xanthias as Euripides, a very clever one maybe. Who knows? But he's very real. And after, I think Frogs, everybody loved the Frogs. It won. People asked it to be reperformed. We still love it. They loved it. And after that, you'll find there's only 2 more plays, but in the Plutos, there is a incredibly funny slave on stage all the way through called Carry On. I've written an article about him. I can send you, if I want, I can send you that PDF as well. But he's much more like Plautus in that he kind of controls the plot a bit like the Plautus slaves. Yeah. But he's also the one who gets all the gags. He's the chief comedian on stage. You know, he's the one who gets the really funny lines. So the whole role has like evolved from Xanthias to Cario. And I don't think there's anything quite like it in Menander. I think it's Plautus who brings it back.
Ooh. It's very, very interesting observation. Oh, thank you very much. And we still love very much the Frogs. Here we loved it, reading it as well. I believe Leonardo wants to make a question.
Yes. Professor, my question is a much broader one. I would like to know your thoughts about Aristophanes influencing modern politics. How do you see this relationship between the Greek comedy and our modern democracy? And I have a short tale to share.
Tell us.
Related to Brazilian politics, because the Lysistrata of Aristophanes was mentioned by a communist politician here in Brazil when the military junta seized power. In the last century. Yes.
Really?
And when an institutional act was presented by the military junta in our national congress, um, he stood up and he, in his speech, he remembered Lysistrata, and he called for the women to abstain themselves from having sex, and he infuriated the military junta, and he was
Of
arrested.
course.
He was arrested for that. So
Oh my God.
this kind of episodes are very
Did he-
interesting.
Did he survive?
Yes, he survived. There was later there was an amnesty, and he survived it. And he was, after our democratization movement, he was re-elected congressman.
Well, look, I think that the Athenian example, it's not just Aristophanes. I think that the Athenians had made a place in their constitution for this comedy. It was an instrument of democracy, funded and organised by the state. This is what absolutely fascinates me. And although we can see equivalents, up to a point, Saturday Night Live, or we have now the Spitting Image come back, but this is not sort of funded by the state. Can you imagine where, just as you've got your House of Parliament and you've got judiciary and you've got all the rest of it, Parliament has to have a competition every year. First, it has a competition for the best plays to be sent in, right? And then you have a public vote on which of those plays they want to see, right? And then you get the three of them. The state and the rich are taxed. The rich are taxed. The plays were put on, funded by an individual rich man who was forced to pay the tax of funding this thing. The guy who got the birds will have hated it. He had to pay for all those costumes, the bird costumes. And then the very same men who all go to vote, the 30,000 who go to vote in the assembly, right, simply go to the theatre and vote on the play. And they pay, these playwrights are basically funded to make very articulate criticism of people who are trying for power of any kind. As I said, it could be ideological power, it could be political power. So this is actually, I would absolutely love it if at taxpayers' expense in Britain, our very, very best comics were paid to attack our politicians. Wouldn't that be a brilliant part? It's comic accountability. It was absolutely brilliant. And we need this so badly, because something like Charlie Hebdo is just run on private money. It's a commercial enterprise. Charlie Hebdo should be paid for by the state. You see what I mean? And it is absolutely vital to every healthy democracy. And we all know that insecure tyrants, even if they've been voted in democratically, there are insecure tyrants. Trump hated Saturday Night Live. He tried to get it shut down. Putin locks up comics regularly. They have to. They hate it. They hate it. They hate it. I always think you're going to be a really, really clever tyrant would actually encourage comedy against themselves, to be secure. But they can't take it. How's Bolsonaro on comedy?
No, he's he's very hateful, I think, of our media and in general of our actors and
yes.
There
tend to be left wing. They always have done. Theatre people tend to be on the left. It's communal art. It's an ensemble art. Just making theatre is a highly collective. It's not always the case. There have been right-wing theatre people, but as a general tendency, if you're attracted to making communal art, you like the commune. It goes. It's and they tend to be much more liberal sexually. There's history of gay theatre, including in ancient Athens. We know a lot of the actors were said to be quite effeminate men because they were very good at it.
And those today are the main opposers of Bolsonaro politics and.
Well, he hates gay people as well as communists, doesn't he?
Yes, yes, indeed.
And women. It always goes. It always goes together.
The oh
I will have to go in about 5 minutes, if that's okay. I've got a family to feed, and
no problem, Edith. If I
maybe two more questions.
Or 2 more questions, okay. If any one of you.
If there are any. Has anyone got? Has anybody asked any?
No, Mariana said that she loved hearing about the comedies from you, and she really wants to read the birds now. I have one question about the costumes.
Yeah.
About how did they did the costumes for the animals? Do we have any knowledge of that? Did they actually took costumes like of birds or frogs during the plays?
I wonder if I can. Yes, they did. I should have put some on the vases. I wonder if I can go online, share my screen. Just give me a second.
No problem. You can in the sharing button. You can put share internet page.
So this is a famous vase. Can you see that?
I'm not seeing it right now.
Can you see that vase or not?
No, I'm not seeing it. Try to try to present again.
All right. I'm going to add it.
Oh, perfect. I'm seeing the slides. I'm
going to put in a new slide.
And insert
Picture. New slide above. How do I do a new slide above? There. And I'm going to put in a new slide. And I'm going to put in. This is a vase. See the bird costumes?
Yes. Oh, that's fascinating. Amazing.
We got also, if I can find one quickly, Greek was back. Yeah, here we are. I'm getting another one now. This will help you with the knights, which aren't animals, but they're on horses on the stage. So I'm going to do another one.
Seriously, amazing.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Not fun.
Yeah.
Now those two pictures, the birds and the knights, are actually not from Aristophanes' comedies. They're earlier, but these show that there was a tradition in all those years when we haven't got comedies from, of animal choruses and animal costumes. I'm sure you have traditions like that in carnival culture. You know, I'm
definitely.
sure. But this shows, what I love is that the birds have actually got the phalluses. Can you see?
Yes.
Birds do not have phalluses, but so they're kind of an amalgam of comic
humor,
humans and birds. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love this one. Isn't that great?
It only shows how much of an amazing experience must have been to watch those plays at the time.
Exactly.
Incredible.
Exactly. I shall save that on that PowerPoint now, so that next time I show somebody. Anyway, I'm sorry I've got to go, but I've got a sore throat. Just a tiny bit worried. I've got COVID.
Oh, seriously.
I don't know if you have sore throat with it, but
it's one of the symptoms. It's one of the symptoms, but there are many others as well. So
yes,
it's possibly just a flu. Let's hope so.
I'm sure it is. So I'm going to go now.
Okay, thank you very much, Edith. Bye bye. Have a nice evening. So, did she left?
Nossa, ela é muito simpática, gente.
Você foi? Sim! Oi, gente. Ela é muito simpática mesmo. Eu vou encerrar aqui a transmissão ao vivo.